The morning sun cut through the thin blinds of the Brookhaven courthouse, casting narrow stripes of light across the worn wooden benches. The air inside smelled faintly of coffee and floor polish, the kind of scent that clung to old public buildings. It was a Tuesday, quiet by most standards except for the low hum of conversation in courtroom 3. A handful of officers from the local precinct leaned against the wall near the back, chatting softly, their laughter low but noticeable. At the front of the room, a woman in her late 30s sat at the witness table, posture straight, her calm presence contrasting with the restless energy in the room. Her name was Alicia Green, though few there seemed to recognize it. She wore a charcoal grey suit, her hair neatly pulled back, a simple gold band on her left hand, and a folder of documents neatly aligned in front of her. The case wasn't hers. It involved a local incident, a small corruption trial that had attracted more attention than usual. Alicia had been called as a federal witness for a technical review of security procedures, but to most of the officers in the room, she looked like a visiting clerk, quiet, polite and unassuming. Judge Daniels, a patient man with a receding hairline, adjusted his glasses as the prosecutor. Assistant District Attorney Frank Mills addressed the court. Your Honor, the prosecution would like to call Ms. Alicia Green to the stand. Alicia stood and approached the witness chair. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and took her seat with measured composure. Frank Mills smiled, flipping through his notes. Ms. Green, could you please state your occupation for the record? Before she could answer, one of the defense attorneys muttered something under his breath to the officers sitting behind him. They chuckled quietly. The judge shot them a warning glance. Alicia glanced toward the sound, her eyes calm, steady. Then she looked back to the prosecutor. I'm a federal security consultant. Could you elaborate on that? Mills asked. I oversee coordination between state and federal departments for critical infrastructure protection, she said simply. One of the officers whispered to another. Sounds like office talk for paper pushing. The two exchanged quiet smirks. Mills, oblivious, continued. And how long have you been in that position? 13 years, she said. 13 years. The prosecutor repeated, surprised. So you've been in national security since your 20s? Yes, sir. The defense attorney rose, adjusting his suit jacket. Objection, Your Honor. I fail to see how her resume is relevant to this case. She's not the one accused of falsifying reports. Judge Daniels raised an eyebrow. Overruled for now. Let's hear her out. Mills nodded, turning back to Alicia. Miss Green, during your review of the department's communication logs, what did you discover? Alicia opened the folder in front of her, her movements precise. I found inconsistencies in the timestamp data from the precinct's report transmissions. The system used to send those reports. An encrypted federal channel registered multiple unauthorized logins. A murmur ran through the courtroom. One of the officers shifted uncomfortably. Another leaned back in his seat, arms crossed, smirking. So she's an IT expert now? He muttered. Alicia paused, then looked directly at the judge. Your Honor, may I clarify for the record? The judge nodded. Go ahead. I'm not an IT technician, she said evenly. My department's responsible for oversight of that encryption system nationwide. The courtroom grew still for a second before a quiet laugh broke from the defense table. The lawyer, a sharp man named Peter Lang, gave a thin smile. Ms. Green, forgive me, but are we to believe that someone from Washington, D.C. came all the way down here to talk about a small-town server glitch? Alicia looked at him calmly. No, Mr. Lang. I came here because your client's department used that system to conceal falsified evidence. The smirk faded. The officers behind him stopped whispering. Lang's voice hardened slightly. And you're saying you have the authority to make that claim? Yes, she said, because my office built the authorization protocols you violated. Lang blinked. Your office? Alicia reached into her folder and pulled out a slim leather case. She flipped it open and placed it gently on the witness stand. Inside, a polished badge gleamed under the overhead lights, the emblem unmistakable. The courtroom fell silent. Even the sound of the air conditioning seemed to stop. Ms. Green, Mills said softly, for the record, could you please state your full title? She looked toward the judge, her tone calm but firm. Alicia Green, Assistant Director, Department of Homeland Security. A collective shift went through the room. Chairs squeaked, breaths caught, eyes widened. The smirking officers straightened instantly. Judge Daniels leaned forward slightly. "Her assistant director," he repeated as if making sure he'd heard correctly. "Yes, Your Honor," she said. "I oversee compliance and counter-corruption coordination between federal and state law enforcement agencies." The prosecutor smiled faintly. "So when you said you oversee the system, I meant I wrote the oversight protocols myself," she said. The defense attorney's voice wavered slightly. "Your Honor, I wasn't made aware of Ms. Green's credentials." "That's because I wasn't here to be announced," Alicia replied smoothly. "I was here to observe how this department handles accountability." The officers in the back row avoided her gaze. The youngest among them, a rookie barely out of training, looked pale. The judge cleared his throat, his tone now careful and respectful. "Miss Green, please continue your findings," she nodded. "Our analysis shows that between March and May, several reports from the Brookhaven precinct were altered before being filed to the state system. Those changes originated from an internal login. That login belonged to one of the officers present in this courtroom." There was a sharp intake of breath. One of the older officers turned red. The defense attorney jumped to his feet. "Your Honor, this is beyond the scope of—" "Sit down, Mr. Lang," the judge said quietly. Alicia continued, unbothered. "When Homeland Security reviewed those entries, we found that certain case files had been manipulated to protect an officer from disciplinary review. The falsified reports were then used to secure promotions and funding." Judge Daniels looked grim. "And what action is your department recommending?" Alicia met his gaze. "Immediate internal review, Your Honor. Homeland Security has already issued the order. I'm here to ensure compliance." The silence that followed was heavy. Even the bailiff shifted uneasily. After a long moment, Judge Daniels nodded slowly. "Thank you, Ms. Green. This court acknowledges your findings and will cooperate fully with the Department of Homeland Security." When she stepped down from the stand, the room remained frozen. Every head turned as she walked toward the exit, her badge glinting briefly in the light before she slipped it back into her case. As she passed the row of officers, she paused. The same two who had laughed earlier now sat rigid, avoiding eye contact. Alicia stopped in front of them, her voice low enough for only them to hear. "Respect," she said, "isn't given because of a badge or a title. It's given because of how you treat people before you know who they are." Neither man replied. She gave a polite nod and walked out of the courtroom, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. Outside, the afternoon sunlight poured through the courthouse doors, warm and sharp, cutting the shadow of her figure across the tiled floor. Back inside, the judge sat quietly for several seconds before speaking. "Mr. Lang," he said finally, "I suggest your client start preparing for an entirely different conversation." The laughter that had filled the courtroom hours earlier was gone. What remained was the quiet weight of realization that the woman they had mocked had just changed the course of the case, and maybe in her own calm way, reminded everyone in that room what real authority looked like. 2 days later, the Brookhaven courthouse buzzed with tension. Word about what had happened in courtroom 3 had spread fast, faster than any official report. What started as quiet murmurs between clerks and bailiffs had turned into an unspoken truth whispered across the precinct. The woman they laughed at was Homeland Security. The local police department suddenly looked uneasy. In small towns, pride and reputation traveled faster than facts. Some officers tried to shrug it off, calling it a misunderstanding. Others stayed quiet, aware that an internal investigation now had real federal weight behind it. In her office at the federal building downtown, Alicia Green sat at her desk, reviewing a stack of case files. Her posture was calm, her face unreadable. The blinds were half-drawn, letting in thin lines of light across the black folder labeled Brookhaven Internal Review. She'd already received preliminary updates from the audit team, emails, communications, login histories. The evidence matched her testimony in court exactly. Her assistant, a young analyst named Jenna Ruiz, appeared at the door. "Ma'am, there's someone from Brookhaven PD asking to speak with you." "Officer Travis Cole." Alicia looked up. "Cole," she repeated, recognizing the name from the report. "Send him in." A moment later, a man in his late 30s entered the room, uniform neatly pressed but nerves visible in his shoulders. He removed his hat as soon as he stepped in. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "thank you for seeing me." "Have a seat, officer," she said. her tone polite but professional. He sat, his hands resting on his knees. I wanted to apologize for what happened in court." She looked at him evenly. "Which part?" He exhaled slowly. "The laughing. The comments. All of it. I didn't say anything myself, but I didn't stop the others either. I just stood there." Alicia nodded slightly, not judgmental, just listening. Cole continued. "I didn't know who you were, but that's not the point, is it?" "No," she said softly. "It's not." He hesitated, then added, "Most of us thought you were just some DC rep here to make a point. We didn't expect you to actually be the point." That earned a faint, almost invisible smile from her. "I'm not interested in being the point, officer. I'm interested in seeing that your department learns from what happened." He nodded. I will." She leaned back slightly. "You've been with the force how long?" 12 years, ma'am." "Then you know the difference between skepticism and disrespect," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "I wasn't offended," Alicia said, her tone firm but not cold. "I've been underestimated my entire career. But what concerned me that morning wasn't the laughter. It was the arrogance behind it. That's not a local problem, officer. That's a cultural one. And it has to change from within." Cole nodded again, the words landing heavily. "You're right. I can't speak for everyone, but I want to do something about it. We've already started reviewing our own practices. Bias training, chain of command transparency." "Good," she said. "But don't make it a box you check off. Make it a habit." He smiled faintly. "Yes, ma'am. I'll make sure of that." For a moment, silence filled the office, heavy but not uncomfortable. Finally, Alicia said, "Tell me, officer, what made you come here in person?" He looked down briefly, then met her eyes. "Because I figured if I was brave enough to laugh, I should be brave enough to say sorry to your face." Alicia's expression softened just slightly. "Then I accept your apology." Cole nodded, standing. "Thank you, ma'am. And if you ever come back to Brookhaven, I promise the welcome will be a little different next time." "I'll hold you to that," she said. After he left, Jenna stepped back into the office. "That was one of the officers from the courtroom, wasn't it?" Alicia nodded. "Yes, he's learning." Jenna smiled faintly. "The others might not." "They will," Alicia said calmly. "Accountability has a way of spreading once the first person takes it seriously." Later that afternoon, Alicia drove to the courthouse to finalize her department's follow-up meeting with Judge Daniels. When she arrived, the courthouse felt noticeably quieter than before. The laughter and chatter that had filled the hallways earlier that week were gone, replaced by an air of uneasy professionalism. As she walked through the lobby, several officers stood aside to let her pass. Some nodded respectfully. Others looked down. She didn't need acknowledgement. She could read the shift in their posture. They had learned something, even if they hadn't said it aloud. When she entered the judge's chambers, Daniels greeted her warmly. "Ms. Green, or should I say Assistant Director," he said with a small smile. "Ms. Green is fine, Your Honor," she said. "I wanted to thank you," he said, "not just for your testimony, but for the message you delivered. I think it reached more people than you realize." She nodded. "Change starts quietly, Judge. It's rarely comfortable, but it lasts longer that way." He smiled thoughtfully. "You sound like someone who's had to live that truth." "I have," she said softly. As she left the courthouse again, she passed the same hallway where the officers had laughed days before. This time it was silent except for the echo of her heels. At the far end, a young female officer stood near the evidence room, straightening some files. When Alicia passed, the woman hesitated, then said quietly, "Ma'am, I just wanted to say thank you." Alicia turned slightly. "For what?" "For reminding people that respect goes both ways." Alicia's gaze softened. "You're welcome. Don't forget that." She stepped out into the afternoon light, the courthouse doors closing behind her. For a long moment, she stood at the top of the stone steps, watching the slow rhythm of the small town beyond, the ordinary movement of people who would never know how close their department had come to scandal, or how one quiet morning had forced a reckoning inside those walls. She didn't crave recognition. She didn't need to prove her rank or her authority. What mattered to her was something simpler, that somewhere inside that courthouse, a few people now thought twice before smirking at someone they didn't understand. As she walked toward her car, the wind lifted slightly, rustling the papers in her briefcase. She closed it gently, straightened her jacket, and smiled faintly to herself. The town would move on. The officers would too. But they would remember her name, not because of her title, but because of the quiet way she had reminded them that true power didn't need to raise its voice. A week later, the courtroom that had once echoed with quiet laughter was filled with something entirely different: focus, restraint, and an uneasy kind of respect. It was the follow-up hearing for the Brookhaven internal audit, and this time, no one leaned back in their chairs or whispered jokes under their breath. The officers sat upright, their hands folded neatly in their laps. The defense attorney, who had smirked at Alicia days earlier, looked pale and tense. Glancing toward her every few seconds as if bracing for impact, Alicia entered quietly through the side door, dressed in another grey suit, her ID badge visible this time. She didn't carry the same black folder, just a slim tablet tucked under her arm. She nodded politely to the judge and took a seat at the federal desk, her calm demeanor unchanged. Her authority no longer needed to be explained. It filled the room naturally. Judge Daniels called the hearing to order. We're here to review the preliminary findings submitted by the Department of Homeland Security in cooperation with the Brookhaven Police Department. Alicia stood, her voice even and clear. Your Honor, our team conducted a full audit of the department's internal communications and record systems. We confirmed that multiple case reports were modified after submission to state review. The origin of those changes has been traced and verified. The courtroom was so quiet that the soft hum of the ceiling fan seemed loud. Alicia continued. 2 officers have already confessed to altering evidence to protect a colleague from disciplinary review. Additional oversight measures are being recommended to ensure transparency going forward. One of the officers near the back lowered his gaze, jaw tight. Another clenched his hands. The judge nodded gravely. Thank you, Ms. Green. Your team's efficiency is appreciated. Before Alicia could sit, defense attorney Peter Lang rose. His voice was polite, but his eyes betrayed discomfort. Your Honor, if I may, my client, one of the officers in question, would like to make a brief statement. The judge sighed but nodded. Proceed. Lang gestured for his client, Officer Derek Shaw, to stand. The man rose stiffly, glancing toward Alicia. His face was flushed, his hands trembling slightly as he began. I just want to say I'm sorry, he said. We didn't think anyone would notice. We thought it was harmless. Alicia's expression didn't change. Integrity doesn't vanish just because no one's watching, she said quietly. Shaw's voice faltered. I know that now. The judge thanked him and moved on to sentencing procedures. But the moment lingered, the unspoken weight of how easily arrogance could turn into regret. When the hearing ended, the room emptied slowly. Alicia gathered her things calmly, not rushing, not lingering. As she walked toward the exit, Officer Cole, the same one who had visited her office days earlier, approached her near the doorway. He looked more composed now, but still respectful. Ma'am, he said, nodding, I wanted to let you know we've started internal ethics training. I'm leading the first session. That's good, she said. Keep it practical. People remember examples more than lectures. That's what I figured, he said with a faint smile. We're calling it the Green Standard. Alicia blinked, caught off guard. I didn't ask for that. I know, he said. That's why it fits. For the first time since the investigation began, she smiled, not out of pride, but something quieter. Just make sure it's about the principle, not the name. Understood, he said. Outside, the courthouse steps glowed under the afternoon sun. News vans waited at the curb, reporters ready to pounce, but Alicia waved them off politely. She didn't need headlines. Her job was never about being seen. It was about what happened afterward, the quiet recalibration that followed exposure. She climbed into her car, placed her badge on the dashboard, and took a deep breath. For years, she had dealt with national threats, cybersecurity breaches, internal sabotage, foreign infiltration. But what she saw in Brookhaven reminded her why her work mattered on every level. Corruption wasn't always loud. Sometimes it lived in laughter, in the small dismissals that told someone they didn't matter. Later that evening, she sat in her Washington office, the city skyline glowing faintly beyond the window. Her phone buzzed. A message from Jenna, her assistant. Jenna. Brookhaven PD just released a statement. Full cooperation with DHS. Officer Cole quoted you directly. Respect isn't given because of a title. It's earned through how you treat people. Alicia read the message twice, her lips curving into a faint, tired smile. She set the phone down and looked out over the Capitol. The lights reflected faintly in the glass, bright, orderly, constant. She thought about the officers' faces when she had revealed her badge. The silence that followed. The look of realization, not fear, but recognition, that the person they had underestimated carried more than authority. She carried the weight of every time someone like her had to prove what should have already been seen. In her years of service, she'd learned that true justice wasn't only in the courtroom or the law. It lived in moments like those, when perception shifted, when respect found its way back into the room. Alicia closed her laptop, stood, and looked once more at the skyline. The city hummed beneath her, a network of people, systems, and stories woven together by trust or the lack of it. Tomorrow, there would be another meeting, another report, another crisis waiting for her. But tonight, she allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. Change had started, not with force or confrontation, but with composure, the kind that made even a courtroom full of skeptics fall silent. And somewhere in a small town hundreds of miles away, a new standard was taking root, not written in law books or federal policy, but in the conscience of the people who had learned to look past their assumptions and see integrity for what it truly was. 2 months later, the Brookhaven case had become a quiet benchmark within the Department of Homeland Security. It wasn't the kind of story that made the evening news, but within government circles and small-town departments across the region, people were talking about it. The day a courtroom full of smirking officers fell silent because a woman they underestimated revealed she was the one auditing them. For Alicia Green, though the world had already moved forward, her work rarely slowed. She had returned to Washington, overseeing multiple regional audits and interagency security reviews. Her schedule was packed with briefings, meetings, and late-night calls. Yet Brookhaven remained in the back of her mind, not because of the embarrassment she caused, but because of what followed. On a grey Monday morning, Alicia sat in her office reviewing field reports when her assistant Jenna stepped in. "Ma'am, there's a visitor from Brookhaven here to see you." Alicia looked up, surprised. "Brookhaven?" "Yes, ma'am," Jenna said, smiling slightly. "Officer Cole," Alicia nodded. "Send him in." Moments later, Cole entered, dressed in plain clothes instead of his uniform. He looked more confident than the last time she'd seen him, carrying a manila envelope under his arm. "Ma'am," he said, shaking her hand. "It's good to see you again." "Likewise, officer," she said. "To what do I owe the visit?" He took a seat. "Actually, it's not official business. I came to give you something." He placed the envelope on her desk. Inside were photos from the Brookhaven Community Trust Program, a joint project between the police department and local schools. In one photo, Cole stood beside a small group of students holding certificates that read, "The Green Standard, Respect in Action." In another, a young woman in uniform was giving a presentation at the same courthouse where everything began. Alicia flipped through the pictures slowly. "You really followed through," Cole smiled. "We did. The department changed a lot after your visit. The officers involved in the falsified reports resigned. We've been rebuilding since then. But the real change came from how the younger officers started thinking about the job." He hesitated, then added, "That day in court, when you showed your badge, yeah, it shook everyone. But what stuck with me wasn't your title. It was what you said after. Respect isn't about authority, it's about how you treat people before you know who they are." That line made its way into every training session we run now. Alicia looked up, her eyes soft. "I'm glad to hear that." Cole leaned forward slightly. "You know, most people don't realize how hard it is to change a culture once it sets in. But that day, it was like someone turned on the light. People didn't want to admit it, but we needed that wake-up call." Alicia smiled faintly. "Sometimes a moment of discomfort is the beginning of discipline." He laughed quietly. "Yeah, I've been living that lesson ever since." They talked for a while longer, about community programs, new ethics courses, and the ripple effect small changes could have in towns like Brookhaven. Before leaving, Cole stood and said, "There's something else. The mayor's planning to invite you to speak at our annual leadership forum next month. It's about accountability and service. Thought I'd give you a heads up. Alicia tilted her head. Are you sure your department's ready to see me again? Cole grinned. Ma'am, they're hoping you'll say yes. When he left, Alicia sat in silence for a moment, the photos still spread out on her desk. It wasn't often that her work brought visible results. Most of what she did stayed behind classified walls, invisible to the public. But this, seeing trust restored where cynicism once lived, felt meaningful in a different way. A week later, she accepted the invitation. The Brookhaven Leadership Forum was held in the same courthouse that had once housed tension and laughter. This time, though, it looked transformed. Fresh paint covered the walls, and new plaques lined the hallway. One of them inscribed with a simple quote, "Respect builds stronger institutions than fear ever will." DHS Director's Address, Brookhaven Case Review. When Alicia entered the courtroom, the audience rose in applause. The mayor introduced her with reverence. A woman whose leadership reminded us that integrity doesn't need to shout to be heard. She stepped up to the podium, the same space where she had once quietly dismantled a defense attorney's arrogance. But now the energy felt different, warm, expectant, genuine. "Good afternoon," she began. "I don't stand here as a federal director today, or as an investigator. I'm here as someone who believes that trust is built from the ground up. What happened in this room months ago wasn't just about a case. It was about perception, about the danger of assuming who someone is based on how they look, where they stand, or what title they don't announce." The crowd listened closely. "I've worked in national security for almost 15 years, she continued. "And I can tell you this. The biggest threat to any system isn't from the outside. It's from the moments when people stop holding themselves accountable. That's when integrity erodes. And once that's gone, no badge, no uniform, no title can save what's left." She paused, scanning the audience. But accountability also has a starting point. It starts with listening. When she finished, the applause was steady and heartfelt. Officers, community leaders, and civilians alike stood as she stepped away from the podium. Afterward, several young recruits approached her shyly, asking questions about her work, about leadership, about what it meant to lead without being loud. She answered each with patience, encouraging them to think deeply before they acted. Outside the courthouse, Officer Cole stood by the steps, waiting. "You did it again," he said with a grin. "You've got everyone thinking." Alicia laughed softly. "That's the goal. Thinking beats assuming." As they stood there in the warm afternoon light, she looked out at the courthouse's stone pillars and the crowd dispersing across the square. The same building that once held arrogance and judgment now carried a new kind of weight, a symbol of what change could look like when humility met truth. Cole turned to her. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you ever get tired of having to prove yourself?" Alicia thought for a moment before replying. "No, because proving myself isn't for me, it's for the people watching who need to see what's possible." He nodded slowly. "That's what leadership looks like, isn't it?" "Not leadership," she said gently. "Service." As she left, the sound of her heels against the marble floor echoed through the courthouse one last time. Not sharp, not heavy, but steady. Outside, the late afternoon sun washed the building in gold. The laughter that had once filled it was gone, replaced by something quieter and stronger. It wasn't the sound of authority. It was the sound of respect finally taking root.